The night of the company dinner, I arrived at the old Riverside Hotel carrying a small gift in one hand and trying not to look nervous because I had spent almost an hour deciding whether my simple black dress was good enough for an event where everyone else seemed to have money for expensive clothes and perfect smiles. I thought I was finally going to have one peaceful evening with the people I had worked beside for nearly 4 years. But the moment I walked through those gold-framed doors, I noticed my department director, Marcus Hale, staring at me like my presence had somehow ruined the evening before it had even started. Marcus walked toward me while I was still taking off my coat, glanced at the gift bag, then looked at my shoes and gave a small laugh that made 2 people nearby turn their heads before saying, "You know this is a private dinner, right?" I honestly thought he was joking, so I smiled awkwardly and said I was invited. But his expression hardened as he replied, "Not exactly the kind of invitation that means you need to stay for the whole thing." And suddenly the laughter around us became painfully quiet. I looked across the ballroom and saw almost 50 employees sitting around beautifully decorated tables, with candles glowing between plates of food and little name cards placed beside every chair, while my name was nowhere to be found, even though I had personally helped organize half the event. Marcus pointed toward a small table near the service entrance and said, "You can wait over there if you want something to eat." And when I asked why, he shrugged and added, "We save the proper seats for people who actually matter to the company." For a second, I could not breathe because I had spent years telling myself that hard work eventually speaks for itself. Yet there I was being treated like someone who had wandered into the wrong building by mistake, and nobody seemed willing to say a word. I wanted to walk straight out, but then I noticed my younger coworker Nina looking down at her plate, clearly uncomfortable, while another employee, Daniel, avoided my eyes completely, and somehow their silence hurt almost as much as Marcus's words. My name is Claire Bennett. I am 36 years old, and for most of my adult life, I had been the person who stayed late when everyone else went home, fixed mistakes without complaining, answered angry customer calls, and trained new employees even when nobody officially asked me to. I had a teenage son named Ethan who depended on me, a mortgage that never seemed to get smaller, and a habit of saying it's okay even when things were very obviously not okay. Because sometimes survival teaches you to swallow your pride before you learn how to defend it. I had joined Westbridge Distribution when it was a small regional company with only one warehouse, and back then the owner, Arthur Coleman, knew everyone's name, brought donuts on Friday mornings, and personally thanked people when they stayed late during busy weeks. But after the company expanded, Arthur became distant. His son moved into the executive office, and Marcus arrived as the new operations director with polished suits, expensive watches, and a habit of speaking about ordinary workers as if they were numbers on a spreadsheet. Marcus had disliked me from the beginning because I asked questions when something did not make sense, and 6 months earlier I had caught an inventory error that would have cost the company thousands of dollars, only for Marcus to quietly take credit for fixing it during a management meeting. After that, my schedule became worse, my workload doubled, my requests for help were ignored, and whenever something went wrong, Marcus somehow managed to make my name appear near the problem, even when I had warned everyone about it beforehand. Still, I stayed because Ethan was preparing for college, and every paycheck mattered more than my pride. So I kept telling myself that Marcus would eventually move on and things would become normal again. That night, however, when he publicly told me I was not important enough for a chair, something inside me finally stopped trying to make excuses for people who had spent years taking advantage of my silence. I looked at Marcus and said calmly, "Okay, I understand," which seemed to surprise him because he had probably expected tears or an argument. But instead, I placed my gift on the nearest empty table and walked toward the exit without giving him the satisfaction of seeing me break. Just before I reached the doors, I turned around and said, "By the way, you should open the blue envelope waiting in the conference room before tomorrow morning." And Marcus's confident expression disappeared for the first time that evening. He called after me, asking what I meant, but I kept walking because I knew exactly what was inside that envelope, and I also knew he had no idea how much information I had collected during the previous 3 months. It was not revenge in the way movies show it, with screaming and dramatic speeches, but a carefully documented record of shipping irregularities, altered inventory numbers, customer complaints that had been buried, and emails showing that senior managers had repeatedly ignored warnings because admitting the problems would have hurt their quarterly bonuses. What Marcus did not know was that I had started documenting everything after a customer contacted me directly about receiving a damaged medical supply shipment, because the same problem had happened repeatedly, and every complaint seemed to disappear after reaching management. I had saved copies of the reports, dates, delivery numbers, photographs, and internal instructions, not because I planned to destroy the company, but because I had become frightened that one day someone would get seriously hurt and everyone would pretend nobody had known. The blue envelope contained copies of those records, along with a short letter explaining that I had already sent the original evidence to an independent compliance consultant outside the company before walking into the dinner that night. I had also informed 3 major clients that I had discovered serious discrepancies in their shipments and told them they should independently review their records, which meant the company could no longer quietly bury the problem by deleting another email or blaming another employee. The next morning, my phone started buzzing before sunrise, first with a message from Nina saying, "Claire, what is happening?" And then another from Daniel saying that senior management had called an emergency meeting and ordered everyone to stop processing certain shipments. Then Nina sent one final message that made my hands go cold. "Marcus is telling everyone you sabotaged us." But Arthur just walked into the warehouse and he looks furious. I expected to feel victorious, but instead, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at my coffee, while Ethan ate cereal across from me and complained about a history assignment, because suddenly the whole situation felt much bigger than Marcus humiliating me at dinner. I realized that exposing the truth could affect innocent workers too, including people like Nina and Daniel who had never mistreated me. And for the first time, I wondered whether standing up for myself had accidentally put other families in danger. At 10 that morning, Arthur called me personally and asked me to meet him at a small cafe downtown, and his voice sounded nothing like the confident owner I remembered from the early years of the company. When I arrived, he looked exhausted and said, "Claire, I owe you an apology." And I answered, "You do." Because I had spent too many years being polite to people who never returned that kindness. Arthur admitted that he had ignored several warning signs because the company had been struggling financially, and instead of confronting Marcus about the growing problems, he had trusted his management team to handle them without understanding how much information they were hiding from him. Then he told me something I had never expected. Marcus had been changing reports before they reached Arthur, making serious mistakes look like small clerical issues, and the reason nobody had questioned him was because the company had become too dependent on his numbers. I asked Arthur why he had allowed someone like Marcus to gain so much control, and he looked down at his hands before saying, "Because he was good at making bad news sound harmless." That sentence stayed with me because it explained something I had struggled to understand for years: how people can know something is wrong and still convince themselves that ignoring it is easier than facing the consequences. Arthur offered me my job back with a promotion, a salary increase, and a direct position reporting to him, but I surprised both of us by saying no because I had finally understood that getting revenge was not the same thing as getting my life back. I told him, I don't want Marcus's office, and I don't want to spend another year proving I deserve respect from people who should have given it freely. And for once, I felt completely calm when I said it. 2 weeks later, I accepted a position with a smaller company across town where the manager actually knew the employees by name. And on my first day there, my new supervisor handed me a desk key and said, "If you see something that needs fixing, tell me before it becomes a disaster." I almost laughed because those words sounded so ordinary. Yet, after everything that had happened, they felt like the kind of respect I had been waiting years to hear. Meanwhile, Westbridge went through a painful internal investigation. Marcus was removed from his position, and several executives were forced to explain decisions they had previously hidden behind vague reports and convenient excuses. Arthur introduced new safety procedures, created an independent complaint system, and personally contacted several former employees to apologize. But none of those changes erased what had happened, because some mistakes leave scars even after the people responsible finally admit them. Then Nina called me one evening and told me that Daniel had found another set of altered records that proved Marcus had blamed several warehouse workers for mistakes he had actually caused himself. Nina began crying as she spoke and said, "Claire, I wish we had defended you that night." And I told her, "You were scared, Nina, and I understand that, but next time you see someone being treated unfairly, don't wait until they leave before finding your courage." Months passed, and I stopped thinking about the dinner every day, although certain things still brought it back, like the smell of roasted food, the sound of glasses clinking, or seeing a gift bag sitting alone on a table. One Saturday, Ethan found the old dress hanging in my closet and asked why I had never worn it again, and I smiled and said, "Because sometimes you don't need to keep the clothes from the worst night of your life to remember how strong you became afterward." Ethan looked at me for a moment and said, "So you won, right?" And I almost answered yes before realizing that the word was too simple for everything that had happened. I told him, "I didn't win because Marcus lost his job, and I didn't win because the company suffered. I won when I stopped believing someone else's opinion could decide how much I was worth." And watching him nod quietly made every difficult moment feel a little more meaningful. A year after that dinner, I received an invitation to Westbridge's employee appreciation event, but this time my name was printed in large letters on the program because Arthur had asked me to speak about workplace accountability and why employees should never be punished for reporting problems. I stood in front of that room, looked at the chairs arranged around the tables, remembered the woman I had been that night, and said, "A chair is just a chair, but the way you make someone feel when you decide they don't deserve one can stay with them for years." I never got the dramatic apology I once imagined, and honestly, I don't need it anymore because I learned that dignity is not something a manager, a company, or a room full of people gets to give or take away from you. Please subscribe to our channel and share this video with your friends and family. We create entertaining and inspiring stories for our viewers, and your support helps us continue making great content for you.